Kisikna Evet Ivri. If you buy a Jewish slave, or I should say Hebrew slave, the term is Ivri. And Rabbeinu Bachi makes this point. Doesn't say Evet Yisraeli. We find that the appellation of Israel was post-Sinai. Ivri is pre-Sinai. We find Moshe Rabbeinu, when he goes to Paro, he says, Elokehu Ivrim Shlochani Aleichem. The God of the Ivrim, of the Hebrews, have sent me. That's pre-Sinai. After Sinai, it's Israel. So this Eved, here we're speaking, this is post-Sinai. This is after we're establishing the laws, the judicial system. The slave, who's the Hebrew slave, if you purchase that slave, what's the extent that you're permitted to keep him as a slave? Sheish Shanim Yavod. He works for 6 years. And the 7th year, he goes free, without any payment. Meaning, when you purchase him for that 6-year period and he was speaking, the two situations where a Jew was sold into slavery, either because he stole and he's not able to repay the person he victimized, and he's not able to come upon the money, so they sell him. So for the value of the 6-year period, that's the money they use to compensate the victim. But let's say he stole an amount that was more than his value, that he's not able to be sold. Because you can only sell a slave if the amount is exactly the value of the theft. So if selling him, he's worth more than, for 6 years, he's worth more than what he owes, you don't sell him. And if he's worth less, you don't sell him. It has to be the exact number. So the situation where you sell a slave for stealing to compensate the victim was rarely ever happened. Secondly, the Gemara tells in Kedushin that the slave has to be treated with a level of priority. For instance, if you only have one comfortable bed in the house, and it's either the master or the slave, you have to offer that bed to the slave. If you have quality bread, and there's only enough for the one person, it's a slave or the master, you have to give it to the slave. And therefore, the Gemara says, Kolakona Eved Latzmo, that if you purchase a slave, it's Kilukona Odon Latzmo. It's like you're purchasing a master. You have to treat the slave as if he's the master. And all this is a discouragement that a Jew should not be sold as a slave. Okay, for instance, the halacha is a woman, even if she steals and she's not able to pay, she's not sold as a slave. Oh, there's only a male. And what are you? So you're a debtor. You owe the money. If a person borrows and he's not able to pay, regardless of the amount of money, we never sell a person into slavery to be able to pay the debt. There's no debtor's prison. It's not a debtor's prison. Here we're speaking about only because he stole. That's the reason why he sold, for the amount. But again, the amount has to be the equivalent of what his value for 6 years. We'll see. But he's referred to as Eved Ivri. So over here, we're speaking about he was sold because he had stolen. There's another case, portion of Torah speaks about a slave being sold, whether it's the equivalent of an indentured servant. A person falls on hard times, and he's not able to support himself or his family, so he sells himself into slavery for a certain amount of money, whatever the master is willing to pay, and that he receives that personally. And with this, he pays his debts, or he does whatever he wants with that money. But that's his choice. He sold himself to slavery. That's not due to because he had stolen and he has to compensate the person who victimized. So over here, Rashi cites the Gemara over here. Kisikner, second Rashi in base, Miyad Bezdin, Shemachru Begnevosel. Bezdin sold him due to his theft that he had stolen, Shenemar, Ke'elo V'nimka Begnevosel. Since he doesn't have the means to repay the person who was victimized, he sold for the Geneva. Or maybe it's speaking about somebody that sold himself because his financial pressure. But maybe if he's stolen for stealing, maybe he doesn't go out at 6. Going out after 6 years is only machru atzmo. There's a later portion by Yikro. At the end, it speaks about if your brother becomes impoverished and he's sold to you. So over there, it's due to his impoverishment. So what's the case over here in Mishpatim of Gisikner? He sold due to being a thief, and he's not able to compensate the person he victimized. Okay? After 6 years, he's freed. Okay? So the Torah says, after 6 years, he has a right, and it's his right to gain freedom. Now, during the 6-year period, if the man has a wife, the man has children, as he said, that the master has to treat the slave as if he's the master. If he only has one piece of quality bread, the slave has priority. The bed, the slave has priority. What about he has a wife and children? If he's working for the Jewish master, who's going to support his family? The master has to assume financial responsibility to support the family while he's in servitude. Although the children and the wife are not bound to any of the dictates of that master. You take the Jew, you take all his financial responsibility in terms of supporting his family. I mean, if a person himself has to be not in his right mind to take a slave, a Jewish slave, as it says, you're acquiring a master. Unless the slave has special ability that it's worthwhile, and the man could afford it, it's worthwhile to purchase such a person as a Jewish slave. Now, this is very important. It says, in Begapo Yovo, Begapo Yetze. If he comes in with his garment, he goes out with his garment. If he only came by himself, what about in Bal Isho? Bal Isho, if he's a married man, Yotzi Ishtu Imo. When he leaves, his wife leaves together with him. So Rashi asks, I mean, his wife was never in servitude. What does it mean he leaves? She leaves with him. Take a look at Rashi. Begapo Yetze. If the Jewish slave you purchased was not a married man, in Rabba Mos Lo Shivcha Kananis, the master Al Korcho, the master cannot impose on him a Canaanite woman to be a breeder, Lodi Mena Vodim, that, and from that woman he'll have other slaves. Of course, we'll see in a moment that the children of that woman do not identify with the father, because there's no pedigree by a Shivcha Kananis, by a Canaanite woman. So it's Al Korcho, meaning, although normally a Jew who marries a Shivcha Kananis or is engaged sexually with a Shivcha Kananis is a Torah violation. It's a lav. It's a lo sasa. But if a person's an Eved Ivri, if the master offers it and he's agreeable, here's where he has no wife, he's permitted. He's not in violation. He's not in violation. But he cannot impose it. But if he chooses, he can. What about Megapo Yetze, Magid Shloin Nosui? What about Bal Yishu, Yisraelis? He's married to a Jewish woman. Yotzi Shtimo, V'chimich Nisha Shetetze. So Rashi asks to Gemara, what do you mean she goes out with him? I mean, she never entered into servitude. A woman cannot be a maidservant unless, we'll discuss later, she's sold by the father as a minor. Person who purchases a Jewish slave, he's obligated to support the wife and the children. So when the servitude comes to an end, as he no longer is considered the master of the slave, he no longer has financial obligation to the man's wife and children. But it's interesting. The Torah over here says there's a problem. If a person becomes sexually involved with a woman, there's always a chance he may become emotionally attached to her. And after 6 years, as we'll see in a moment, he says, I love my master, I love my wife, and I love my children. Although halachically, since there's no pedigree regarding a Shifcha Kananis, the children don't identify him. They're not halachically his children. But yet, because he was involved with this woman as a woman to bear children and having that level of relationship, he says, Ahavti Isishti, but she's not your wife. Halachically, she's not your wife. And they're not your children. Doesn't make a difference. So the Torah, if he has a wife, the master has a right to impose the Shifcha Kananis on the slave. Because since he has a wife, he has that kind of relationship with a Jewish woman, and he has, or additionally, he may have children. Therefore, even if he gets involved with this woman will not actually overtake his life. As a result of that, the master has a right even to impose the Canaanite woman on the Eved Ivri. But if he has no wife, although the Torah permits it, Bal Korcho, but to impose it on him, to force him, he cannot, because you're putting him in a position that almost he has no choice. If he makes the choice, he's agreeable, that's his choice. And he has to deal with all the possibilities that he may get involved and not want to leave after 6 years. But if he has but to impose it on him, that should have no right. Because it's maybe too much for him to deal with. That's his choice. But if he has a wife, since he's in this area, he's secure in that relationship, therefore the master even has a right to impose it on the Jewish slave to become a breeder. So Rabbeinu Bachli explains, why is he called Eved Ivri? Ivri is the appellation pre-Sinai. Elokeo Ivrim Shlochani Aleichem, as Moshe Rabbeinu says to Paro, the God of the Hebrews. So he explains, as we'll see in a moment, that if he says, I love my master, I love my wife, I love my children, they take him to the Bezdin, and they take him to a door and put an awl through his ear, through the cartilage of his ear, his right ear. Why through the ear? So the Gemara says in the Kedushin, if we're speaking about a person who had stolen, they say, Ozen Shisham B'Sinai, the ear that heard at Sinai, lo sigzol, you're not permitted to steal. And he went and stole. So evidently, there's some kind of defective hearing mechanism that although he heard the words, he wasn't able to internalize it. And because of that, he stole, and he's in this predicament. As a result of that, that's why they choose the ear. And what about if we're speaking about of Mochar Atzmo? He sold himself as an indentured servant because he fell on hard times. So Ozen Sheshama B'Sina Avodahem, you are my servants. And the inference is V'lo Avodim Lavodim, and you're not slaves of mortals. You're like princes, you're the subject of Hashem. So how do you sell yourself to an ordinary mortal? So again, that wasn't fully internalized and comprehended properly. Therefore, again, the ear there's a defect in that mechanism. Therefore, you put the hole through the ear. Those are the two situations. Okay? When he leaves, once he's finished with the servitude, he's no longer permitted to that Canaanite woman. There's a negative command, lo yeh kodesh. The word kadesha normally means a prostitute. You can't prostitute yourself. You can't be in a position to be involved with a woman she's not marriageable. We say that a slave is amadom el chamor. It's like a donkey. Meaning they're all chomer, even though she's obligated in mitzvahs as a woman. A Canaanite slave, male or female, is bound by the mitzvahs of a woman, but factually she's not a Jew. They're not Jewish. But because the human being becomes the chattel of the master, that level of connection obligates the male or female to be bound to the mitzvahs of a woman. We'll see a Canaanite slave undergoes a conversion, but it's a conversion without Kabbalah's mitzvahs. Normally, a non-Jew cannot own a human being. If a non-Jew purchases a human being, he does not own him as you own a chattel, as you own an animal, or any asset. The Jew, when he purchases the non-Jew and converts him to be an Eved Kanani, or he purchases an Eved Kanani, as you own a chattel, you own that person. You are the master. That's called master. It's not like you have an employee and you have an employee contract and you're bound to work so much time or whatever, you're not his master. He's a totally independent person. He bound himself, he committed himself to give his time to the employer. That's it. Here, the person is classified as master. Okay. But here we're talking about a Jew. He does not own this person. This person is an independent person. He's a Jew. He happens to be in servitude for 6 years. So Rabbeinu Bach says that's why he's called Ivri. Although we're holding post Sinai, but because he's in this predicament, because something that he heard at Sinai wasn't properly processed, therefore he's a pre-Sinai Jew. Therefore, the slave is called Eved Ivri. So over here, the Medrash says something interesting. We find that the word Ra, even though that Medrash is not here, but it's similar, is never associated with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem's name is always in what? Always associated in the positive. Whenever we speak about punishment or tragedy, it says the Jewish, what will come upon them? It's not Hashem does that. Rabbeinu, the Medrash says it should say Ivri Eved. How do you say a Jewish slave? Ivri Eved. A slave who happens to be a Hebrew. If it would say Ivri Eved, that means we're calling the Ivri is an Eved. An Ivri is not an Eved. Although it's pre-Sinai, he's not an Eved. He's an Eved who happens to be an Ivri. It's for that reason. You know, we learn Rabbeinu Yonah, Shari Tshuva. He writes, you know, people, especially if they speak Yiddish, they refer to a little child who still wets his pants, or even when he's a little older, even though he's trained, they'll use a certain word which is inappropriate. You know, I don't want to use the word. The way you say he urinates in Yiddish, he's a little whatever it is. Okay? It's a little pejorative, but it's a child. I'm not going to record this. Just the word. Yonah says it's inappropriate. A child who's Tselem Elokim, a Jewish child that's in the image of God, and he's God's child. How do you use such a pejorative term on a Jewish child? He holds it's an Issa D'Oraisa. It's Torah violation. You're not permitted. But people, careless. Again, it's Eved Ivri. It's not Ivri Eved. We don't associate the term Eved with Ivri. Even though Ivri is a pre-Sinai classification, it's Eved, a slave who happens to be a Hebrew. It's interesting. There's a question which is asked. He only gets to all through the air if he says after 6 years, I love my master, my wife, the children. I mean, if the reason why I'm putting the whole through his ear is because he didn't fully process at Sinai. He shouldn't steal. The moment he's sold into slavery, we should put a hole through his ear with all. Why only after 6 years only then does the Beis Din put the hole through his ear? Question which is asked. We find the Orach Chaim HaKadosh speak about tsaras, leprosy. What's leprosy? You find a lesion on your skin, which is an intense whiteness. Whether it has it was a black hair, it turned white, or it turned goldish color, whatever it was. But when the Torah speaks about tsaras, leprosy, it explains it. It says, Kia be'or besoro, neged tsaras, on the skin of the flesh. Why does it say on the skin of the flesh? Say b'bsoro. Why or besoro? That's Orach Chaim's question. So Orach Chaim answers, because when the Jew, why does a person become a leper? He spoke Lashon Hara, or he did other things, and therefore that's the cause of the leprosy. So it's due to a spiritual deficiency. That's why. So the question is, when a Jew sins, is it he's sinning because that emanates from his essence, or this happens to be an incidental? it's not his essence. So by the Torah saying or b'soro, this doesn't emanate. This is not his essence. It's not, flesh is the essence of the person. This is something which is considered like superficial. It's something in passing. He happened to contract it, but it's not his essence. He says, but a non-Jew, he says, the basar is tzoras. The actual flesh of the non-Jew, that is tzoras. He represents something which has no relevance to Kedusha. But the Jew, his essence is Kedusha. That this happened to him, this is like an incidental. That's the Orach Chaim HaKodesh. People, they make mistakes. You make a mistake. It's not an indication that you have a defective mechanism. You weren't able to internalize it. We make mistakes, we have blind spots, we get distracted. But after being in this situation for 6 years, you have a human master. You have a woman you're involved with and you use as a breeder. And the children, not your children. How after 6 years do you say, I love my master, this is a terrific thing. I love my master, this is what it's all about. I love this woman, although she's not your wife. I love my children, they're not your children. Something. Now it's been confirmed that you really have a problem. During these 6 years, people make mistakes. But after 6 years, and Torah says, Chofshi, you go free. You can be reinstated and be totally a free man and function, not in this terrible situation. How do you say, I'm in paradise? That now it's a confirmation. The man has this defective mechanism, and therefore that's why you put the hole through his ear. Okay? Not only that, we find that Shabbos is cyclical. Every 7 days is Shabbos. 6 days is you do your work. 7th day is Kodesh Lashem. It's designated holiness for God. So why do we keep Shabbos? To commemorate Masa Bereshis, creation. So you can say very simply that because that was the process. Hashem was creative for 6 days. On the 7th day, he refrained from creation. We being his chosen people, we have to emulate Hashem, and we the testament to the world that Hashem's the creator. That's the simple understanding, which is correct. But he takes to another level. He says, we find same thing with the sabbatical year. 6 years you're involved in the agriculture of the land in Eretz Yisrael. 7th year, the land remains fallow. It's Kodesh Hashem. The same concept. It's sanctified. The year is sanctified for God. So over there, what do you do during the 7th year? So if you look in the Sefarno, in Parshas Bahar, it's a year for the study of Torah, for tefillah, and for meditation, to reflect on your spirituality. So Ramchal explains, a person is involved in the mundane for 6 years, day in and day out. What happens to a person? You get worn down. And you lose your balance, your equilibrium in terms of spirituality. You need what we call a sabbatical. You need a sabbatical. You have to re-immerse yourself in spirituality to recharge, as we say, to recharge your batteries, your spiritual batteries. So now when you go into another 6 years, you have the wherewithal to contend with all the challenges of life. You regain those sensitivities which are necessary to make appropriate choices. I'm telling you, Ramchal. So he says, 6 days we're involved in the mundane. We work. We're creative in the physical sense. That affects us. But the previous Shabbos gave us enough spiritual energy, ability, stamina, that we're able to contend with all those issues. If you go beyond 6 days and the 7th day, then already you've become handicapped. It's like a person abuses his health. Suddenly you abuse your health to a point you can't recover. You've already overstepped the line and you've depleted yourself to a point where you're not going to be balanced because you weren't sufficiently infused with spirituality, which is Shabbos is what? Shabbos, the holiness of Shabbos is like as has a semblance of the world to come. If you observe the Shabbos, you have a relation with Hashem. Olam Baba is Hashem. That's the Kedusha Shabbos. And when you observe Shabbos as you should, you're touched by God. be touched by Hashem in that context, although we don't feel it, but that's a reality. It gives us that inner ability or sensitivity to make those decisions and meet the challenges properly. That we're fully in charge of the ability to make choices. A person goes beyond, the Torah says, even though this man's going to be sold for 6 years, goes out after 6 years. 6 years, it's still within recovery. He could recover. Once he goes beyond 6 years, he says he's Eved La'olam. He's a slave forever. And what does Rashi say? Olam, which is based on Gemara Kedushin, until the Jubilee year. Ara Yovel. When the Yovel comes, even though he remained beyond 6 years, the Yovel comes, he goes out free. That's La'olam. So the obvious question is, which we asked in the past, if it's Ara Yovel, it should say until the Jubilee year. What does it say Ad La'olam? Ad Olam forever. So the way I explained it based on this Ramchal, because the moment you overstep, you go beyond 6, even though you're freed, whenever the Jubilee year comes, but you're a slave forever. The impact of that slavery, that you overstepped your bounds, you're affected and you've been minimized due to that experience, that you had amassed more than 6 years, you're an Eved L'olam. You're always an Eved. Even though you're a free man, but you're a slave. The effect of slavery, you carry with that until the day you die. That's why it happens to be the Jubilee year, but it's depicted as L'olam because that's the effect of going beyond 6 years. If the master gives him a wife, does it a woman, v'yodalo vonim ovanos, and from that woman he bears sons or daughters. That woman and her children belong to the master. And when the 6 years are up, he goes out as he came in with his garment. He doesn't take this woman, doesn't take the children with him. Rashi. The master is permitted to give him this Canaanite woman to breed children for him, who are avodim. Oh, Israelis. Maybe she's a Jewish woman. Talmud Lomar Ishu Adoneo. But it says the woman is the chattel of the master, and the children belong to the master. It's clear we're not seeing a Jewish woman because the pedigree of a Jewish woman is Jewish, and no one is able to own a Jew. Shareo Ivrio Afiotis Beshesh, which we'll discuss if a father sells his daughter as a minor. So she goes out either with after 6 years or with puberty. If she reaches puberty before 6 years, she also goes out. That even the female maidservant goes out after 6 when she's a minor. Now it's interesting. He's a slave for 6 years. He's Eved Ivri. I would say, if after 6 years it says Vim Oma Yomar Ha'odom, right? Doesn't say that. After 6 years, he's not a slave any longer. Correct? But what is he saying? I want to remain longer. But he's not a slave. Vim Oma Yomar Ha'eved. Why is he referred to the Eved? Because the only way you could make this request is you're still an Eved. Because you've already given up your identity as that free man. As an Eved, you want this kind of woman. As an Eved, you identify with these children, although they're not your children or she's not your wife. Now, the Gemara in Ksubah speaks about Avda behefkeret nichale. The Gemara says that if you have a minor, a non-Jew, the Bezdin could convert him, because we say that to be a Jew is a privilege. Although the minor the minor has a right that when he becomes 13, an adult, he can actually object to it because he says it's not a schus for me or not. What about an Eved? Could you convert an Eved? So the Gemara says an Eved hefker nechalei. An Eved has free reign in the sexual realm. Every woman is permitted him. Every woman he's married to or he's engaged sexually, it's not his wife. A slave has his pick of the of the field, because no slave is able to marry any woman if they're a Canaanite. The only person that he's permitted to is a Canaanite woman. A non-Eved, if he marries a non-Jewish woman, two non-Jews, that woman is his wife, and we talk about adultery. If they agree to live together as husband and wife, they break that bond, it's considered adultery. But an Eved with women, even though the woman has been designated for that slave, that's not his wife. Avda b'hefker nichlei. Once it's hefker. Now, why is he attached to this woman? A free man becomes a slave. It's a level of degradation which is not to be believed, as Ernie just said. You use it as a breeder. But I love this woman. I love my kids. Who are we talking to? When you talk to an Eved, that's the way an Eved talks. If you talk to a free man, that's not the way a free man talks. The Eved says, Mama Yomo Eved. And that's the idea. He's the idea. He's become an Eved. Ahavtis Adoni es ishti v'zbonai lo eitzei chopshi. I don't want to go free. Second. I don't know if Elohim. The master takes him. Elohim is the Bezdin. And they take him to the door, to the mezuzah, to the doorpost. And the master perforates his ear with an awl. Now he's become his slave forever. Avodololam. So Rashi says, who's Elohim? The Bezdin. Who are the ones who oversaw the transaction, who sold this man to slavery? Was Bezdin. And Ladelzum Mezuzah. So over here, Rashi cites the Gemara. V'rotza Adonai v'sa'osno, Hayemonis, the right ear. Oh, any other small, maybe it's the left ear. Is the right ear or the left ear? You see what difference does it make? Tamalo, Ozen, L'Gzera Shava. We have L'Gzera Shava. Ozen over here means the right ear. Nemar kan v'rotza Adonai is ozno. V'nemar b'mitzora. Tenuch Ozen Hayemonis, Hamatar Hayemonis. When they put the blood, you sprinkle the blood with the korban, which purifies him, takes him out of his leper state. You put it on his right ear. On his right ear, Malal Yemonis of Kan Yemonis. It's interesting. It's the right ear. Right always represents is the essence. Right is always something more, has greater value. The right over the left. Meaning the right is what has been already is defective. A person, God forbid, loses usage of his right arm, he has to use his left arm, he has no choice. The right ear, where is the defect? The defect is in the ear, which represents something you should have understood. 1 second. Ma ro ozenli rotza, we go shari gorm shebeguf. So now he's asking the question. This is the Gemara. Why does Hashem choose the ear to be perforated more than any other part of the body? We speak about a nose ring. Put it through the nose. Put it through some other part of the body. Today you have all kinds of piercing. Okay? Omre Yochanan and Zakai, Ozen Zo Shishama al Shel Harsino, Tignov, Holaf Lagonav. The ear that heard Sina, you're not permitted to steal. And this person went and stole. Tirotza. Therefore, it has to be receive the what? Receive the all through the ear. The Atzmo. What about if he sold himself? He didn't steal. He fell on hard times. Ozu Shama Shel Sinai, Al Sinai, Kili B'nei Yisrael Avodim. You are my subjects, Hashem says. V'olach v'kona odun la'atzmo. And he goes and he acquires a mortal master. It's a total disrespect. Tirotza. Reb Shimon hoyadoresh mikrozer kimin chomer. Reb Shimon he explains it like a chomer. Chomer is like a packet of perfume. Why do you take to the door and the doorpost to put the hole through his ear? Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu delzum mezuzah she'edim b'Mitzrayim k'shepasachti ala mashkal v'oshtei mezuzos in Mitzrayim during Makas Bechoros, when I skipped over the door and the lintel and the doorpost which had the blood of the Korban Pesach. V'amarti kili b'nei Yisrael avodim, and the reason why you're not subject to that is because you're my servants. You're my servants, you're not servants of mortals. This man goes and acquires a mortal master for himself. He wrote up his name. Therefore, it's perforated in the presence of the door and the lintel for that reason. It didn't register. And what's pointed out, we're avodai v'lo avodim l'avodim. Now, in Egypt, it says we were avdi paro. The Jews were never slaves of ordinary people. We're always the slaves of royalty. You know, there's a difference if you're a slave of royalty or a slave of a commoner. Royalty, you'd say you could pride yourself, even though you're a slave, but look who you're the subject of. You're the slave of the king. In Egypt, we were avdi paro. So the obvious question is, we were slaves to the populace, right? Not the paro. But the truth is, Yosef, through his ingenious overseeing the country during the famine, what did he do? Initially, he sold the grain. People purchased it. Money, the herds, the flocks. Eventually, he said, we have nothing left but our bodies. So he said, no problem. You become the chattels of Paro. The land and you people, you Paro's chattels. But we'll cut a deal. So who are the Egyptian people? Due to the contract which Joseph had made with the Egyptian people, they are Paro's servants. That's who they are. So when you work for that person, who are you working for? You're working for the boss. Who's the boss? The boss is Paro. So even though you're working for the lowly Egyptian, I'll give you an example. You work for a corporation and you have a foreman. The foreman may be whatever it is. He may be tattooed from head to toe and he barely looks human. But you're not working for him. You're working for the company. He happens to be overseeing you, but the employer is the corporation. The commoners here, they're just they're pawns on the board. That's all they are. But we work for the Egyptians, we're slaves of Paro. Therefore, avodah hevelo avodim avodim. Before you avdi Paro, now you might. Before you were the avodim of the physical royalty. Lahavdil. Now you're the servants of the ultimate, of the Creator. This is the ultimate royalty. Now it's your mamlechus kohen v'goy kodosh. You're the kingly, princely treasure of God. So if you're that, how do you go do that? I forgot one of the. I think maybe the Chutz Lavavos gives this moshel that a person, even as a child, used to play in the mud with other kids, even the prince. When he becomes an adult, puts on his regal garments, and he goes to see his subjects, and he sees his old friends. They're still playing in the mud. He sheds his regal garments, and he also jumps into the mud. They say, what's something wrong with you? Then when you used to play in the mud, you were a child, you didn't understand. But now that you understand that you're royalty, How do you give up your royal regal garments to go back in the mud? So the takeaway is, if you don't know who you are, is one thing. But if at Sinai we became Avdi Hashem, how do you now go to that level? You're going back into the mud, into the morass of life. How do you do this? Therefore, it's a problem. It's a level of what? Of almost like it's temporary insanity. How do you go there? 6 years, that's temporary insanity. After 6 years, this is permanent insanity.
Rabbi,
That's to do with this last Egypt and whatever it is where we at. It's late. Okay, we're gonna stop here. Once in the shul in I'm not gonna say the town in New Jersey. It wasn't an Allen shul, somewhere else. And I was in there, and you know, and they knew who I was. What aliyah do you think they gave me? I wasn't personally offended for me. You know what they gave
give
me?
you Ravi.
Psicha. You understand? I was offended, not for me. I saw this is what Balabatim are. If they know what I represent, how do you give me psicha? You give a teenager psicha. You understand? It's not they gave me chamishi or they gave me whatever psicha.
But maybe
I was
they
taken
don't.
aback.
Maybe they
What?
don't. Maybe they don't realize that
They don't realize.
the psicha is. Maybe they thought psicha was very
Yeah,
important.
like Nila.
For
Yeah,
the
but
Torah.
every week they give it to a teenager. It's not they always give the most honorable person to give psicha. If that was the minhag the shul, it's a different story. So he'd say that whatever.
I will tell the Rav in my shul that
It
psicha.
happened in your shul. It happened in your shul.
I know, that's why I'm mentioning this. But
Yeah.
in my shul, they do give psicha to people who are guests in the shul, not the teenagers. They
I
people who
understand, but who's the
come
guest?
to what?
Who's the guest? What? Every guest you give him psicha.
People who are new to the shul, who are guests in the shul, they give them psicha.
Okay. I'll
I'm
give you
not
an
sure what that means. I don't
Rabbi,
know.
Rabbi,
Hagba.
you should
Gemara
have
says
asked
Hagba is
this.
the most honorable coverage you give a person. Hagba.
Hagba, yes.
Ramosha finds things at a minion. You give him shlishi or do you give him Hagba? When he was younger, he could lift the Torah. I mean, he wouldn't be offended, but in terms of what he represents, and shlishi is always the more honorable. You don't give him Hagba.
Rabbi, you should have asked.
I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying I was like taken aback.
You should have asked for a speaking part.
I should have what?
You should have asked for a speaking part.
It's okay. I'm not an actor, you know? Okay. Okay, let's see the Shari Chuba.
Rabbi, is it okay to ask not to be honored? For instance, I told the Gebarim this Shabbos that I don't want any aliyahs. I don't want any recognition.
Why?
Is that
Why? Because you're just coming back.
No, because I'm hosting the whole Shabbos.
Oh, for that reason.
I'm chairing the whole Shabbos.
Sure, definitely.
So it's okay to ask not to be honored.
Yeah, because you want to give somebody else to have the aliyah instead of yourself.
Of course, I
want to make a differentiation. If you have a person who should be honored, and it's obvious he is, and the person says, please don't honor me, he's doing the wrong thing. Because if they don't honor him, that's a dishonor.
Right.
But you not getting the honor is not a dishonor.
Right.
Okay.
But if they give me Basicha, I should take it.
Yeah, definitely. Why not?
Okay, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
You come to our shul, Alan.
Okay.
I think half of your show is going to be in Englewood this weekend.
I think you're right.
We left off 288. Now this is important. Everything's important. You're not permitted to hate your brother in your heart. Although outwardly you don't display your feelings, but in your heart, you have negative feeling towards that person. The mida mulelis pshoim rabim.
Rabbi, what page? I'm sorry.
Page 288.
Thank you.
Torah violation. Lo sisno achicha b'levavecha. There's a negative commandment to remove from our feelings, our emotion, midas asina. V'mida muleles pshoim rabim. It actually u'mesavevis kama alilos nishchosos. Because if a person has that hate, it brings about not good things. It breeds many not good things. Kmo lashon hara, shushokol keneged chayvi misas bezdin in a certain context. I mean, who do you speak about negatively? The Chofetz Chaim, when he lists the 14 positive commandments that you're in violation, one is v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. You don't speak negatively about somebody who you love. So definitely it's a breach in v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. So people say, but it's the truth. Chofetz Chaim addresses this, but it's the truth. He says, if you did something which was wrong, that was truth. Do you want people speaking about you? So if it's v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, being the truth is not sufficient to say something negative about someone else. So it's clearly a breach of that. Kashi's buyer. Now, story. My mashgiach, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha, he was a great tzaddik. Not only was he proficient in Shas and he was the posek, everything, but he was a mashgiach from the old Demir in Europe. And there was a certain student in yeshiva, he must have been about 20, he was a genius, and came from a very wealthy family, and he was a little eccentric. And he was working on a PhD in chemistry, and he was a person, he did his own thing. And he did many things in yeshiva, which disrupted the whole equilibrium in yeshiva due to his behavior. And my mashgiach had difficulty reining in on him. So my mashgiach was a short man. He was a tall person. This guy was working on his PhD in chemistry at the time. My mashgiach goes over to him and says, I want to tell you something. I really have hate in my heart for you. He says, why am I telling you? Hate doesn't mean he hated him. A dislike. Why? Why am I telling you? Because the Rambam says that you're only in violation of this love only if your fellow is not aware what you feel in your heart. Why? Because since he's not aware of your feelings, so he can't protect himself in certain contexts because he doesn't know where you're at. Because you speak outwardly, you behave one way, in your heart, you're behaving differently. But if he knows exactly where you stand, he's able to contend with you with the position of the person who dislikes him. He says, that's why I'm sharing it with you, that you should know exactly what I have in my heart, what I feel about you. That's what he said to him. Could you imagine? Don't think for a moment that I have any positive feeling, my feeling's negative. Just understand that. So I don't want you to do anything for me, to ingratiate yourself to me, and know exactly where I stand. So whatever you think, you should know exactly where I'm at. That's what he said to this person. So you should not be in violation as in your heart. Okay, to be continued. See the Gemara.
Rabbi, can I say something quickly?
No, we were late as it is.
Okay, no problem.
Wait for tomorrow. We left off, we're speaking about the Morrison, we said that if a person is a custodian and the owner of the item is in an employment or at doing some service for the borrower, for the hired custodian, and even for the unpaid custodian, he has no liability. Xeris HaKosov. That's called Bol Levimo. Where does the Torah write Bol Levimo? It's written by Shoel. It's not written by Shomer Socher. So the one wants to know, but yet the Mishnah says that even if you're Shomer Socher, you're a paid custodian. If the owner of the employer is in the employment, is doing any task, even a task, not even employment of the Shomer Socher, when he assumes the responsibility to be the custodian, he's exempt. He has no liability. Okay, no liability. So the Gemara asks, how do we know? It's stated only by Shoel. The Gemara says, well, Shoel who has greater level of liability, if he's exempt, seemingly the Shomer Socher should also be exempt. So the Gemara says, no. That he's exempt, we'll see in a moment. Let's get back here. Gazlan, who Ashkan Lechiyuv, Liftar Minolan. How do we know a Gazlan is exempt for Volavim? Chitem and nails b'shura meso.
Where exactly are we, Rabbi?
We're about with lines that are narrow, about halfway down the page. Liftar Minolan. You see it? Maybe it will learn from, if the animal normally by a shoel a borrower, it breaks its leg or it dies, the shoel has liability. But yet, if it's bolavimo, he's exempt. Malashura Mesa, Shkenonis, you know why he's exempt? Because as it is, we're being so extremely strict with him. Therefore, if it's bolavimo, therefore we let him off. But a Shomer Socher, where he's absolved, he's not obligated, he has no liability for Shura Mesa, maybe even Balavimo, because it's expected of him, and he failed on his watch, maybe even Balavimo, he should be chayav, he should be liable. Elagom Mishomer Socher, Elagomar Mishomer Socher. A second. Second. The Torah says that if a person's a shoel, it dies or it breaks its leg, if it's both living you potter. What about Gedei Vaveda? And Bolivima by a shoel, is he absolved? You'd say, well, if he's absolved if it breaks its leg or dies, if it's stolen or lost, he should also be absolved. Mar says, no, we're talking about shoel. Why? Because shoel, we're letting being a little more lenient with you because we're so extremely strict with you. But Gedei Vaveda, where it's a lesser level of strictness, maybe Balavimo is not going to absolve you, right? That's what the Gemara is saying. On Geneva Shvuro Mesa Balavimo Yapoter, because that's onus. But Geneva Veda by Shoel, how do we know that Balavimo absolves the Shoel? That's the Gemara's question.
Rabbi, it says it explicitly though, Baal Imo, that he is.
Yeah, but it says it within the context if it breaks its leg or it dies.
Right. So that's explicit.
Well, yeah, no, but in what context are we freeing him of that liability?
Baal
In
Imo.
what context? Where it's onus. So onus as it is like beyond the pale that he should be held accountable, held liable. So there we say, Bolavimo, we'll let it go.
Because it says it though. It says
I
that.
understand this. The
Okay.
Gemara said, if it says it applies to all, you'd say to all the levels of liability of a shoel.
But that's my question, Rabbi. Why would we assume that it applies to the Geneva Aveda if it just says?
You know
by
why?
the-
Because I'd say
by the
this.
owner?
I'd say
What?
as strict as the Torah is with the shoel, that he's even liable for Shvuro Mesa. If it's Bolavimo, he's exempt. That's what I'll say. That's what the Torah says it there. that as strict as we are, even that, we absolve him. But it doesn't only mean that. It means all his liabilities. So the Gemara says, no, maybe the Torah is saying he's absolved because it's an onus. But it's less than an onus, maybe not. Maybe you read it the way you're saying it.
Right. By the way, the Rav is recording still. I don't know if you want to record.